Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and I am here today to do the last best books of 2024 list that I'm going to do before Joel and I do our own best books of 2024 list, which will be at the beginning of 2025. We always wait until the year is officially over before we film. So this is going to be a look at Time Magazine's 10 best fiction books of 2024. I took a quick peek at this, and I think this is a good blend of books we've already seen, some books that are a bit of a surprise, and that makes it kind of fun to talk about. I will note before we begin, people tend to get upset and leave comments saying you shouldn't review books you haven't read. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I am just going to read you the blurb that they have, go through the list, and all I can talk about is my own interest in reading these books. If I have read the book, I will talk about my impression of it. Yours might differ, and you can let me know in the comment section down below. But then all I can really talk about is whether or not I'm interested in reading a book. And the purpose of this is really to help me find books that I might find interesting, maybe challenge my perception of some books that I had thought I didn't want to read or anything like that, and help discover new things that I might want to read. And in doing so, hopefully the same thing happens to you. You might discover something that you are interested in reading. So that's the intention. Let's get into it and start with number 10. The other thing that's really fun about this list is that they rank it. Unlike the New York Times Book Review's best books, the Washington Post's best books, and any of the other lists we looked at, this one is actually ranked, which is kind of fun. All of those other videos will be linked in the description box down below, by the way, if you would like to check them out as well. So, starting at number 10, we have The Coin by Yasmin Zaher. This was included on Publishers Weekly list. Again, that will be one of the videos that will be linked in the description box down below if you would like to check out more of these best of lists. Here's what they say about this from Time Magazine. In The Coin, a stylish Palestinian schoolteacher navigates a cramped New York City, where she's obsessing over the large inheritance she can't access due to her brother's controlling hands. As chaos swirls around her, she vies for control, attempting to cleanse herself of the many ways American culture is taking a toll on her. This presents itself in varied forms, including bathing in boiling water and even breaking down to her students. Apologies. Soon, Yasmin Zaher's anxious protagonist becomes addicted to purging herself of filth as she detaches from reality. With biting humor and incisive prose, Zaher presents a dizzying portrait of a woman on the edge. It sounds really interesting. It sounded interesting when it was on Publishers Weekly list, and I got a little bit of mixed feedback on it. So if you've read it, I'd love to hear what you thought down below. But it definitely strikes me as something I would be curious to read. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of time left in 2024, so it's not something I would prioritize to try to read by the end of the year. But it is something I would be curious to catch up to at some point, and let me know if the same is true for you. Let's move on to number 9, which is also from Publishers Weekly's list. It's The Anthropologists by Aysegul Shavash. I looked up how to pronounce the author's name. I hadn't done it in Publishers Weekly because when I did my reaction to that video, I was trying to go in blind. So this time I saw it on the list and I looked it up, and what I saw was Aysegul Shavash. If I got it wrong, please let me know in the comment section down below. This is something that I am interested in, and actually I had put a hold on it at the library and it just became available this morning as I'm filming this video. I don't know if I will manage to finish it or even start it before the end of the year, because again, we're coming up so close. But that should show you that this is something that I'm definitely interested in reading. Here's what they say. Is there a plot in Aysegul Shavash's The Anthropologists? Technically, yes, but it's not really the point. Asya, a documentarian, and her husband Manu are looking for a new home in an unnamed city. Meanwhile, Asya has decided that a local park will be the focus of her next film. These projects move the book forward, but what makes this slim novel sing are the intricately drawn ways the couple spends their time with the people around them, whether neighbors, friends, or family members. As Asya and Manu view apartments and imagine different futures for themselves, Shavash crafts a remarkable narrative about the ordinary moments that fill our lives. Sounds interesting to me. If you've read it, I would love to hear what you thought of it in the comment section down below. But that is definitely one that I am interested in reading for myself. Number 8 is Ghost Roots by Pemi Oguda. This is something that was on the shortlist for the National Book Award this year. Ultimately, it did not win. I heard a little bit of mixed feedback on it in the ramp up to the National Book Award announcing its winner for the fiction category. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that this at least flirts with elements of magical realism. It kind of takes myth and magical things, and that is not something that everyone appreciates in a book. So it seems like the feedback I've gotten on the book so far really depends on how you respond to writing like that. I would be curious to read it at some point. It's not something I'm going to prioritize, but hopefully I will remember it in 2025 and will sort of circle back to it and get around to it. Here's what they say. Across the 12 short stories in her debut collection, Pemi Oguta asks how we can move forward while being reminded of the past. These stories, all set in the author's native Lagos, explore the collision between myth, memory, and reality. Characters are combating ghosts of all shapes and sizes, which keep popping up in the most unexpected places. In Manifest, a woman is horrified when she finds her daughter's face is being overtaken by that of her deceased, abusive mother. In The Hollow, an architect is tasked with remodeling a home that keeps changing due to the spirits trapped within its walls. Ghost Roots brims with an unsettling energy as Oguta twists her narratives in amusing and unpredictable directions. Sounds interesting to me. Again, don't know if I would get around to it. There's so many books on my TBR, but it does strike me as something that I would be interested in. Coming in at number 7, we have The Book of Love by Kelly Link. Kelly Link is traditionally a short story writer. She has popped up, I can't remember which list she was on. I think it was Publishers Weekly that included Kelly Link. But she was also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for one of her story collections, and I've heard great things about those collections. She does kind of flirt with, her books can be a little weird, let's just say that, and I think response to her work depends on how you respond to that. Book of Love is a big book. It's like a brick, and it flirts with elements of fantasy and ghosts, and those are things I don't typically read a lot of. However, someone commented to say that they think there are elements of what I usually read in this book that would make it a good way of getting outside my comfort zone, because I do think it's important to read outside your comfort zone. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to find a book that has elements that are within your wheelhouse and then takes you outside to other areas. And someone commented to say that The Book of Love by Kelly Link would do that for me. So that definitely got me interested. I don't know if or when I would get around to reading it, but we'll see. Here's what they say. In Kelly Link's debut novel, and again, she has released short story collections, but this is her first novel. 3 teenagers are resurrected from the dead and given the chance to return to their lives, but they can't all stay for good. The trio is tasked with completing magical tasks in order to earn a place back in their sleepy Massachusetts town. In surreal, joyful, and at times devastating turns, they reckon with old wounds and come to better appreciate the people they've left behind. The Book of Love is funny and whimsical as its characters harness fantastical powers, yet it's also grounded in one of life's ultimate truths. Everyone eventually runs out of time, even if we can escape the inevitable for a little while. And that does sound really interesting. So maybe this is something I will try to get to in 2025 as a way of reading outside of my comfort zone. Because again, I do think it's really important to do that. And I tend to not get along with books that involve ghosts. But maybe this will be one that can meet me at where I am and bring me to somewhere else. As I said, get me out of my comfort zone and be something that I would enjoy. So we'll see how that goes. If you have feedback or thoughts about The Book of Love by Kelly Link or any of Kelly Link's short story collections, let me know in the comment section down below. She's an author I really need to catch up to. I haven't read her yet. At number 6, we start seeing another book that has popped up on several of these lists. It's Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. I had kind of thought that this might win the National Book Award. We'll get to a little bit more of that later on this list. It's one that I would really like to catch up to. I don't think it's going to happen by the end of this year at this point, but we shall see. Anyway, here's what they say about Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Stumbling through his days as a hospital actor, Cyrus Shams travels to the Brooklyn Museum, where a terminally ill artist has put herself on display for her final exhibit. Cyrus, recently sober and obsessed with death, has lived a life punctuated by loss, beginning as a baby when his mother perished in a plane crash. Now he finds himself drawn to the cancer-ridden painter and her morbid exhibit. Kaveh Akbar pulls these seemingly disparate characters closer together in a wrenching narrative that is both a multi-generational family saga and a portrait of a young man attempting to make sense of life. Reaction to this has been a bit varied. Some of that has to do with the direction that the book takes toward the end, and I've been trying to avoid spoilers about that, because obviously I haven't read the book yet. So it feels like reaction to this book depends on how you respond to where the book ultimately ends up going. And also a little bit about Kaveh Akbar is a poet, and there have been people who just kind of haven't gotten along with the book on its own, but I am very interested in trying. This has been frequently described as one of the most original and creative books of 2024, and it has consistently been showing up on best of lists. So it's definitely one that I would need to catch up to, or want to catch up to, in 2025, especially since it feels like it could be a contender for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 2025. We'll see how things go with that. There's another contender that would seem like a more likely fit for that prize, but we'll talk about that later on this list. Coming in at number 5, it's happening again. All Fours by Miranda July. I think anybody who has been following my videos about these best of lists at the end of the year has been very surprised by how consistently All Fours has been showing up on these lists and in part of these conversations. And some of that is that there's a good amount of people who read the book and thought, oh, that's fine. There were people who read it and really did not like it. And in both cases, people have become more and more confused by how consistently All Fours has been showing up on these lists. I have been pretty happy to sit on the sideline of that conversation. I attempted to read a short story collection by Miranda July earlier this year, and it felt like it was trying too hard to be kind of funny and hipsterish, and I did not finish it. I DNF'd it pretty quickly. And therefore, when All Fours was announced, I felt very comfortable sitting this one out and letting the people who enjoy Miranda July have it. But it is surprising, given how much All Fours appears to be a cilantro book, that is, some people like it, some people hate it, that it is so consistently showing up on these lists. It was also on the shortlist for the National Book Award for fiction, and it has been very consistently showing up on year-end best lists. And the way people talk about it, I feel like it's a bit different, but I would rather read Sandwich by Catherine Newman again before I would read All Fours the first time. So there we go. And even Sandwich, I feel like there are people who read that book and loved it there, and there are people who would probably be thinking the same thing, like, that was a good book, but why is it consistently showing up on all of these best of lists? And it's just an interesting place to be. Anyway, here is how they describe All Fours. Filmmaker and writer Miranda July's second novel explores the reawakening of a 45-year-old artist caught between her desires and the realities of aging. All Fours begins as the unnamed woman leaves her child and husband in Los Angeles and hits the road on a planned cross-country drive to New York City. But less than an hour outside of town, she pulls off the freeway and into a motel, where an unexpected love affair with a younger man steers her thrillingly off course. Their steamy time together propels the protagonist down a path that forces her to reconsider her relationship with intimacy, sexuality, and the rules of marriage. July writes with a ferocious electricity as the woman becomes obsessed with her new love and upends her life, all while inhabiting a body that is changing in ways she's only just beginning to understand. Which sounds interesting, but again, I've heard a lot of negative feedback about All Fours. If you are someone who's read this book and loved it, feel free to add your voice in opposition in the comment section down below, and let me know that you liked it, what you liked about it. But a lot of what I have heard has been negative at this point, and a lot of that is just surprise that it has been so successful on these year-end best lists. Maybe that's unfair. I haven't read it and I don't intend to read it, so I can't really say for sure. But again, if you have thoughts, leave them in the comment section down below. That takes us to number 4, which I was really excited to see on this list. Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. I have this advanced reader's copy of the book that I got from Tin House, and I have read this book and I enjoyed it. Here's what they say about it. For years, Charles Lamisway has kept a watchful eye over his daughter, who lives on a nearby Penobscot reservation and has no idea her father is a white man. She's being raised by her mother and stepfather, the latter of whom Elizabeth believes is her biological parent. Charles catches glimpses of Elizabeth's life from his porch across the river and yearns to know her, but then she stops showing up. After weeks go by with no sightings of his daughter, Charles decides to take matters into his own hands, embarking on a quest that forces him to confront his complicated past, as well as the life he never got to live. Told in exciting prose, Morgan Talty's Fire Exit is a haunting book about heritage and the meaning of family. If you know me, you know I love a book about a complicated family. This is a book about a complicated family, so it's right in my wheelhouse. I also really loved Night of the Living Rez, which is a story collection that Morgan Talty had published a couple of years ago. If you have not read Night of the Living Rez, allow me to encourage you to read Night of the Living Rez and then Fire Exit as well. It confronts a lot of really interesting ideas, such as blood quantum and what it means to be part of a community, what it means to be part of a family, and whether or not your blood relations matter in either of those things, and what the ties that actually bind us are. And as someone who has been a foster father to a Native person, it was really fascinating and hit a lot of personal chords for me. So I have been a little bit disappointed not to see this book pop up anywhere. I keep thinking that Morgan Talty would be a great fit for the National Book Award for Fiction, at least on the long list, and it hasn't happened yet. But I'm glad to finally see it showing up on a year-end best of list. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to seek out a copy of this book. Coming in at number 3, Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. I'm a little surprised this one hasn't popped up very much, because at the middle of the year, it showed up on a couple of, those best of the year so far lists, and then it hasn't really been anywhere other than the New York Times 100 Notable Books of 2024. So it's interesting to finally see it show up on a list here. Marie-Helene Bertino's inventive novel begins when an unusually small and jaundiced baby named Adina Giorno is born in Philadelphia. Raised by a single mother, her childhood is marked by the usual things: going to school, making friends, as well as an uncanny ability to communicate with extraterrestrial life via a fax machine, though she keeps that part of herself secret. As Adina grows, she reports on the human life she observes with a clarity that is often hilarious. Quote, "Upon encountering real problems, human beings compare their lives to riding a roller coaster, even though they invented roller coasters to be fun things to do on their days off." End quote. Through Adina's watchful eyes and intense desire to understand the world, Bertino unveils a sweet and strange exploration of what it means to be human. Aliens are something else that I really don't get along with in fiction very well. So I feel like before I would read Beautyland, I would catch up on a previous novel by Marie-Helene Bertino. I believe it was called Parakeet, and I've heard pretty consistently good things about that book. And I feel like I would read that, and if I get along with it, I would probably think about reading Beautyland. But right now, I think I would hold off on this one. If you've read Beautyland and if you have feedback about it, I'd love to hear it in the comment section down below, especially since this is a book that has not really shown up on these lists, so we haven't really been talking about it at this point. Moving on. Number 2 is also a surprise, something that hasn't really been popping up on these lists. We Were the Universe by Kimberly King Parsons. I read a short story collection by Kimberly King Parsons that had been longlisted for the National Book Award for Fiction, and I don't remember the title of it. I thought it was okay. So when I heard that she had a new novel, I admit, because I was just kind of meh on the story collection, I decided pretty quickly to sit this one out. But that's one reason I love going through these lists, because maybe this will make me reconsider that decision. Let's see what they say about it. Leaving her young daughter and husband in Texas, 20-something Kit goes on a retreat with her best friend in Montana. Well, I live in Montana, so right away there's something that kind of catches my interest. The getaway is fun at first, until a drunken night goes awry. Kimberly King Parsons' overwhelmed protagonist is suddenly reminded of the loss that formed the gaping hole inside her chest, the one she's always stepping around to just survive each day, the death of her beloved sister, Julie. When she returns, Kit feels Julie's presence everywhere, and her reality begins to warp as old memories of a shared adolescence marked by acid trips and band practice begins to feel real again. In this novel about the shape-shifting nature of love, Parsons captures Kit's grief in aching and honest terms. Grief is a difficult topic for me over the last few years because, in the last 3 years, I've lost 2 dogs after somewhat lengthy illnesses. Lost both of my grandparents, have another friend who's going through a very tough time right now. So books about grief are kind of difficult. I'm not really at the point where I can engage with them. I was doing a little bit better earlier this year. So I'm tempted to hold off on this one just because of that, although I do love books about complicated family dynamics. So this does sound interesting. If you have read We Were the Universe by Kimberly King Parsons, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, and maybe I'll think about circling back to it. I think my hesitation, in addition to the thing about grief, is that the story collection I read by her immediately grabbed my attention and sounded really interesting, and then I felt kind of underwhelmed by it. So I'm a little worried that the parts of this book that are catching my interest would just end up leading to the same conclusion. But maybe that's not fair. So if you've read this book, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. The number 1 book on this list is not really going to be a surprise to people who have been following these lists. It's James by Percival Everett. I mentioned the book that ended up winning the National Book Award for Fiction instead of Martyr. It was James. It was also on the shortlist for the Booker Prize this year. I thought it had a good chance at winning. It ended up not. That's fine. And I also mentioned a book that feels like more of a frontrunner for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for 2025 compared to Martyr. It's James. Although, I say it again and again and again, and I'll say it one more time. Being the frontrunner doesn't really mean anything because they don't announce a long list in advance. They don't announce a short list in advance. They just announce the Pulitzer. So any idea of what might be the frontrunner is just guessing from people who are not actually voting on the Pulitzer Prize. So take all of that with a grain of salt. Frequently, being the perceived frontrunner doesn't actually end up meaning anything. But this is the biggest critical hit of 2024. It feels like it's just ubiquitous on these lists, even more so than All Fours. It has been very consistent across the board, and I think we will continue to hear a lot about this book into 2025. Here's what they say about it. Percival Everett's reimagining of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is one of the most acclaimed and widely read books of the year, and for good reason. James, which won a National Book Award and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, is a sweeping story centering on Jim, the enslaved sidekick in Mark Twain's classic adventure tale. Everett sends both Huck Finn and his friend, reintroduced as James, down the Mississippi River as he pokes holes in the 1884 novel and paints the original protagonist's companion as a perceptive observer of danger, humanity, and language. As he journeys toward an unknowable future, James wrestles with a gnawing loneliness that only grows in his increasingly fraught world. In giving a beloved character the agency he so deserves, Everett presents his most propulsive novel to date. Now, there are people who were not big fans of James. I felt a little thrown by the conclusion of the book when I read it when it was first released. However, the more James has sat with me, the more I've come around to really appreciate it and feel excited when it ends up succeeding. But there have been people who didn't come around to it, who didn't like it as much. But I feel like even though it appears even more consistently on these lists than All Fours by Miranda July, there isn't the same curdling of sentiment that you see happening with All Fours, because general sentiment on this book is that it is a really good, important work of American fiction and just fiction in general. And for that reason, it feels much easier to celebrate this book than it does All Fours, which, again, seems a lot more cilantro than James. Even people who don't like James, for the most part, admit that they see a lot of really good qualities to the book and to Percival Everett's writing. I do feel like it's only a matter of time before Percival Everett wins a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. It would feel correct if it were for James, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. So those are Time Magazine's 10 best fiction books of 2024. If you have comments about any of the books they've included, comments about any of the books they left off, let me know. And if you have recommendations for me based on this list and my interest in these, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.